Hey everyone, welcome back to my channel, Mr.Creepy N. So, today's video is definitely going to creep you out. In this video, we're getting into 4 real accounts of people who found themselves trapped in terrifying situations during the worst February blizzards of their lives. Before we begin, let me know in the comments where you're watching from and what time it is for you right now. If you enjoy this kind of content, make sure to like the video and subscribe. Alright, let's get into tonight's stories. I lived on Caldwell Street for 11 years before the night I started second-guessing every decent instinct I've ever had. February in our town was usually manageable, cold, grey, the kind of season you endure rather than enjoy. But the storm that rolled in on the 8th was different. The county issued a level 3 emergency before noon. Roads closed before dark, the kind of weather where you feel a specific quiet relief that you have nowhere to be. My wife and I had prepared the day before, stocked the pantry, split firewood alongside the house, and by 9 o'clock we were settled in. Power flickered twice, but held. I remember sitting on the couch with a book I wasn't really reading, watching the snow press against the base of the living room windows. That's when I noticed Carol's porch light was off. Carol lived directly across the street. 53, recently divorced, lived alone. We weren't close in any personal sense. We waved from driveways. She once knocked to tell me my side gate had blown open. I'd helped her drag her trash cans back after a windy morning. Good neighbor, functional. The kind of person you don't think about until something is different. Her porch light had been on every single night for 11 years. Her ex-husband had wired it on a dusk sensor before the divorce, and all that time, I had never once seen it dark. That night it was dark. I pointed it out to my wife. She said the storm had probably tripped the sensor. I told myself she was right, and went back to my book. We went to bed around 11. My wife fell asleep before me. I was still half awake when the knocking started. Not frantic, not urgent. 3 slow, measured knocks. The kind a person makes when they're trying not to startle you. I went to the door and looked through the peephole. Carol was standing on my porch in her winter coat, pulled over what looked like pajamas. Her hair was damp, even though her hood was up. Her arms were pulled tight across her chest, and she was staring at the porch floor. I opened the door. "I'm so sorry," she said before I could speak. "I didn't know who else to come to." My heat went out. We brought her in. My wife came downstairs. We made tea, turned the guest room up to 70 degrees, and Carol sat at the kitchen table looking genuinely unsettled. She said the furnace had stopped sometime after 10. She'd waited 2 hours, hoping it would reset on its own. She apologized 3 times for bothering us. Everything felt right until my wife, just filling conversation, asked about Carol's daughter. "Is Emily still in town?" "I thought I saw her car out front on Thursday." Carol set her mug down slowly. "No, she went back to Columbus in December." "Oh," my wife said. "I could have sworn I saw lights moving through your upstairs windows last night. I figured she was visiting." "That was just me," Carol said. "I've been sleeping poorly, moving from room to room at night." She smiled. My wife nodded. The conversation moved on, but I sat with it. Because on Thursday morning, I had salted my front walk. I remembered it clearly, because I'd run out of the bag on the porch and had to get the spare from the garage. While I was outside, I noticed the white Honda Civic parked in Carol's driveway. I had not seen it arrive. I had not seen it leave. It was still there Friday afternoon when I brought the recycling bin out. Carol drove a gray Subaru. The Civic belonged to Emily, who, according to Carol, had been in Columbus since December. I didn't say anything. Carol went to bed in our guest room just after midnight. At 5:45 in the morning, I let the dog out with her back and stood at the kitchen window with my coffee. The storm had died. The street was still and buried. Carol's front door was standing open, not wide, maybe 6 inches, the way a door sits when the latch doesn't fully catch. But there was no wind, nothing that would push a door from inside. I put my boots on. I crossed the street. I know I shouldn't have. 11 years of being a decent neighbor is a hard habit to think your way out of. I pushed the door open with 2 fingers and stepped into the entryway. The cold inside was nearly the same as outside. The house was dark. I stood at the bottom of the staircase and called Carol's name out of habit, knowing she was asleep in my guest room. Then I heard it, upstairs, faint, a child humming, not a melody I recognized. The low, wandering kind of sound a small child makes when they're sitting alone, entertaining themselves in an empty room. I stood at the bottom of those stairs for a very long time. I did not go up. I backed out, crossed the street, went inside and called the police. 2 officers arrived and searched every room of that house. They found nothing. No one hiding. No sign of disturbance. Nothing out of place. The white Civic in the driveway was registered to Carol's daughter, Emily, who confirmed from Columbus, over the phone, that she had not been home since December 22nd and had not lent the car to anyone. Nobody could explain how it got there. Carol went back to her house the following afternoon. She brought over a thank you card 2 days later. That was the end of it. On the surface, 3 weeks after the storm, a 9-year-old girl from 2 streets over was reported missing. She'd last been seen on the evening of February 8th, just before the blizzard turned serious. I never told my wife about the humming. I've thought about it every single day since. I don't know what I would have found at the top of those stairs. Part of me thinks I already know. The other part is grateful every single morning that I turned around and walked away. That little girl was never found. I worked the overnight shift at a 24-hour gas station on Route 9 for about 8 months during my mid-20s. It wasn't a glamorous job, but the night differential helped with rent, and most shifts were quiet enough that I could read for hours between customers. February blizzards hit that stretch of highway hard. The county plows always prioritized the main roads, so Route 9 got buried and stayed buried until morning. On the bad nights, I'd go 3 or 4 hours without a single car passing through. The lot lights hummed above empty pumps, and it felt less like a gas station and more like a waiting room at the edge of the world. The night of February 14th was one of those nights. By 10 o'clock, the parking lot was a flat, white sheet. The pump canopies were groaning under packed snow. My manager had called at 9 to say he wouldn't make the shift change at midnight. He told me to stay put, keep the door locked from the inside unless a customer came in, and call him if anything felt wrong. I had the emergency protocol binder, the landline, and a space heater wedged under the counter. The first time the door chimed, it was 11:47. A man came in wearing a heavy canvas work coat, the kind with a worn corduroy collar and brass snaps. He was probably mid-40s, average height, thick beard, with snow caught in it. He walked straight to the coffee station without looking at me, filled a large cup, and carried it to the register. He set down exact change before I'd even touched the keys. I hadn't told him the price. "Road's a mess out there," he said, sliding the coins forward. "You heading far?" I asked, just filling silence. "Not too far," he said. He took his coffee and walked out. That should have been the end of it. 40 minutes later, the door chimed again. Same man, same coat, same snow in the beard, same slow walk to the coffee station. He poured a large cup, brought it to the counter, and set down exact change again. Same amount, without asking. I almost said something. Some people pace in bad weather. Some people need small routines to manage anxiety. I told myself that's what this was, and took the money without comment. He was almost at the door when he stopped walking. His back was still toward me. "You shouldn't leave the back door propped open," he said, "even in weather like this." My mouth went dry. I had propped the stockroom door open earlier that evening to clear out the smell of a cleaning product I'd used on the shelves. I had closed it before the sun went down. I was certain because I remembered pulling it against the wind and hearing the metal latch click into place. "I closed that hours ago," I said. He turned around. His face was completely flat, not threatening, not apologetic, just empty, the way a person looks when they've stopped making the effort to seem normal. "I know," he said, and he left. I went to the back immediately and checked the door. It was fully latched. I pushed on it hard to confirm. It held. I stood in the stockroom trying to reconstruct what he could have meant. Maybe he'd passed through earlier in the evening and seen it open before I closed it. Maybe it was nothing at all. I went back to the counter and watched the lots through the window. His truck, A dark green older model, no visible plates from my angle, was parked at the far end of the lot away from the pumps, engine running, no movement inside. It sat there for the next hour. At 1:15 in the morning, the door chimed a third time. I had my phone in my hand before he reached the counter. He didn't go to the coffee station. He walked directly to the register, placed a folded piece of paper on the counter, pressed one finger on top of it, and looked at me. "I found this on your car," he said. He turned and walked out before I could respond. I waited until his headlights pulled out of the lot before I picked up the paper and unfolded it. It was a gas station receipt, mine, from earlier in the shift when I'd moved my car from in front of the entrance to the side lot. I had crumpled it and tossed it onto the passenger seat, intending to deal with it later. It had been inside my locked car. I called the non-emergency line and stayed on the phone with the dispatcher until my manager arrived just before 4 in the morning, driving slowly through the unplowed lot with his hazards blinking. The police checked my car thoroughly. The lock had been manipulated, not broken, worked open with a specific tool carefully, without leaving obvious damage. Nothing inside was taken. Nothing was left behind except the receipt he had placed in my hand. The security footage showed his truck parked at the edge of the lot for 67 minutes. No readable plates. No clear image of his face from any angle. They never found him. I quit 2 days later, and I have not worked a night shift since. Not because I'm afraid of being alone in the dark. I've been alone plenty of times since then without a problem. What stays with me is the exact change. 3 visits, 3 separate transactions. The correct amount each time without asking the price, which means he had been inside that store before. On other nights, other shifts, watching long enough to remember something that's small and specific. The thing that terrifies me most isn't that he was watching me that night. It's that I never noticed him until the night he decided I should. I moved into the Hargrove Apartments on Denison Avenue when my daughter Maya was 4 years old. It was a 6-story building, old but solid, thick walls and slow radiators that clanked through the night like they were thinking about something. We were on the 4th floor, Unit 4C. I was working part-time as a medical transcriptionist from home, freshly separated from my husband, trying to keep things steady for Maya while I rebuilt everything else from scratch. The building had 13 units. Most tenants kept to themselves, which I genuinely appreciated at the time. The only neighbor I spoke to with any regularity was a man named Garrett who lived in 2B on the 2nd floor. He was somewhere in his early 50s, retired, always in the lobby when I came back from the school run. He held the elevator door. He remembered Maya's name and always asked about her. He once helped me carry a full grocery order up 4 flights when the elevator was out of service, and he refused to let me carry anything. He had that steady, unhurried quality that made you feel like the building was safer with him in it. I stopped thinking of him as a neighbor and started thinking of him as a fixture, part of the building, like the mailboxes or the fire extinguisher in the stairwell. February came in hard that year. The storm on the 19th shut the city down entirely. Travel ban in effect before noon. Schools cancelled. Maya and I spent the morning at the kitchen table, doing puzzles and watching the snow stack up in thick, even slabs on the window ledge. It was the kind of day that felt sealed off from the rest of the world, which I liked back then. Around 2 in the afternoon, the power went out in our unit. Not the whole building, just our floor, and apparently the 2 units on either side of us. A wiring issue. The building supervisor called and said he couldn't get there in the storm, but told me to check the breaker box in the 4th floor hallway and reset the main switch. I did that. It didn't work. I was standing in the dim hallway, squinting at the breaker labels with my phone flashlight, when Garrett came up the stairwell. He said he'd noticed our windows go dark and came up to check. He offered to run an extension cord and power strip from the hallway outlet under our door, just enough to run the space heater and keep the refrigerator going until the super could fix it properly. I said yes without hesitation. He was in and out in under 10 minutes, professional and quiet. Maya barely came out of her room. That night we slept under extra blankets with the space heater running. Around 3 in the morning, Maya crawled into my bed during the storm, the way she sometimes did, and I tucked her in and lay there listening to the wind test the windows. In the morning, the power was back. The super had remotely reset the breaker from his phone. I coiled up Garrett's extension cord and went downstairs to return it. He answered before I knocked. Coffee in hand, already dressed, I handed him the cord and thanked him. He said it was nothing, the same way he always said things. Easy and certain. I turned to leave. The angle of his open door was different from any time I'd been there before. Wider, and at that angle, I could see a section of his entryway wall that I'd never seen. He had a corkboard mounted just beside the coat rack. I registered it in pieces. Photographs, printed on regular computer paper and penned in a loose arrangement, 8 or 9 of them. My brain tried to process them as something normal, family photos maybe, or printouts from a holiday. Then I recognized Maya's red coat, the backpack, with the yellow star patch. She was standing in the lobby, looking down at her shoes the way she always did, while waiting for the elevator. She didn't know anyone was there. The second photograph I recognized was me, on my couch, asleep, a book resting on my chest, taken through the living room window from outside, at a downward angle. I am on the 4th floor. I don't remember what I said. I remember being in the hallway, then in the stairwell, then inside my apartment with the deadbolt turned and the chain on and Maya in my arms while I called the police. She kept asking what was wrong, and I kept telling her it was fine, and she didn't believe me. The officers who responded found more photographs inside his apartment, dozens of them, other tenants, primarily women, taken through windows over what investigators later estimated was several years of planning. They found a long lens camera in a padded case under his bed. They found a handwritten log with unit numbers, dates, times, and notes about daily routines. My unit had its own page. Garrett was arrested that same morning. He was calm when they let him out. He didn't look at me in the lobby. The building supervisor told me afterward that Garrett had lived there for 11 years. Before I moved in, before most of the current tenants moved in, he had been there first, and had spent years learning the building from the inside out. I moved out before the end of that month. Maya still doesn't know the real reason why. She was 5 by then, and she told me she missed the apartment because she liked watching the snow fall from the big window in the living room. I haven't been able to explain to her, and maybe I never will, that the thing she was looking out of was also being looked into, for longer than I want to think about. I haven't lived above the ground floor since. I worked nights at Pinecrest Care Annex for 6 years. It was a small residential facility, 18 beds, attached to the main county hospital by a covered walkway that nobody used after dark. We handled post-surgical recovery and low-dependency psychiatric holds. Nothing acute, the kind of unit where the nights were usually quiet enough that by 3 in the morning, the hardest part of the shift was staying awake in the chair. The blizzard on February 11th changed the staffing situation quickly. 2 nurses called out before sunset. The on-call supervisor couldn't make it up the access road. By 9 o'clock it was me, 1 aide named Patrick, and 12 residents who were all, mercifully, already asleep. I had done skeleton crew nights before. You stay methodical, you check your rounds, you keep your phone charged. It's manageable as long as nothing unusual happens. At 11:40, the intercom from the front entrance buzzed. I almost didn't answer it. The facility was in lockdown. Travel ban had been in effect for 3 hours. No admissions were scheduled, and none had been called in. I looked at Patrick, and he looked at me, and I went to the desk and pressed the button. A man's voice came through. Calm, measured, no urgency in it. He said he was bringing in his father. He said his father had walked away from militant group home earlier that day and had been wandering outside in the cold. A passing motorist had spotted him near the county line road and called the son's number from a medical ID bracelet. The son had driven out before the travel ban went into effect to retrieve him and was now at our door because the group home's medical wing was inaccessible in the storm. I should have called the main hospital before buzzing anyone in. I should have called militant group home directly to verify the story. I should have followed the intake protocol from the first line to the last, which would have taken 40 minutes and required 2 signatures I didn't have that night. I buzzed them in. The father came through the door in a wheelchair pushed by a younger man in his mid-30s. The father was elderly, late 70s. heavily layered in a green wool coat. He appeared disoriented and glassy-eyed, which fit the story. He had a hospital-issued ID bracelet on his left wrist. The son had a calm and organized manner. He answered every question I asked without hesitation. He had an insurance card. He had the group home's phone number. He had a partial transfer form already filled in. I put the father in room 6, the nearest available room to the nursing station. I told the son visiting hours were suspended due to the emergency and that he could call at 8 in the morning for an update. He thanked me, shook my hand firmly, and left through the front entrance. At 12:15, I finally sat down to log the transfer and called Militant Group Home to notify them. The woman who answered put me on hold without explanation. I listened to silence for 3 minutes. When she came back, her voice had changed. She said their resident by that name was sitting in the common room right now. He had not left the facility. He had been present at the 11 o'clock bed check, same as every night. He had not been outside at all that day. I set the phone down and walked to room 6. The bed was empty. The green wool coat was folded neatly on the bedside chair. The ID bracelet was lying on top of the pillow. I checked the attached bathroom. Empty. I checked the hallway in both directions. Empty. I found Patrick at the far end of the unit, and we searched the building together in under 4 minutes. Every room, the utility closet, both bathrooms, the covered walkway, nothing. Whoever had been in room 6 had left the building without passing the nursing station. He had been inside, alone and unsupervised, for at least 35 minutes. I called 911. 2 officers arrived 90 minutes later behind a county plow. They swept the building and the grounds and found one set of footprints leading from the emergency exit at the back of the building across a service field. The trail disappeared where the snow had drifted deep. They could not follow it further. The ID bracelet went to evidence. The blood type printed on it matched no resident in our system and no patient in the county hospital's database. The transfer form the son had handed me was printed on plain white paper with no facility letterhead. The phone number written on it for Militant Group Home was a disconnected line. The investigators requested all exterior footage. The parking lot camera showed the son's car arriving at 11:38, and it showed that when he pulled in, the back seat was empty, no passenger, no visible wheelchair. He had stepped out alone, walked to the rear of the car, and lifted the wheelchair out of the trunk by himself. His father had been in the trunk. The investigators believed they were looking at a man with a genuine cognitive impairment who had been used deliberately to gain entry to a secured care facility, used during a skeleton crew shift, during a travel ban, when verification was slow and supervision was thin, used for what specific purpose they could not confirm. Nothing was stolen from the facility. No resident was physically touched. But Doris and roommate, an 81-year-old woman recovering from hip replacement surgery, had her door standing open the following morning when it should have been closed. She slept through the nights heavily. She couldn't tell us anything. She died of a pulmonary embolism 4 days later. Her physician said it was a common post-surgical complication in patients her age. The death was documented as natural causes, and that finding was never challenged. I know that. I've read everything I could find about post-surgical embolism rates in elderly patients, and I understand that it happens without outside cause. I know that logically. I just cannot stop thinking about her open door. The distance between room 6 and room 8 is 11 feet. I know because I measured it. Months later, long after I had already resigned. 6 years of doing that job carefully. 6 years of protocols followed and forms completed, and patients accounted for every hour. One blizzard, one calm voice on an intercom, one decision made in 30 seconds. That's all the space a person like that needs. Nah, nada, blurro, blurro, ro, 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 ro. And that's all for tonight, everyone. 4 stories, 4 ordinary nights that became something none of these people ever fully walked away from. A humming from an empty staircase. A man who memorized your coffee order before you ever noticed his face. A neighbor who turned your window into his. And a door that should have stayed locked. If any of these stayed with you, drop it in the comments. I read every single one. Like the video, subscribe so you don't miss the next one, and please stay safe out there. Lock your doors. I'll see you in the next one.